September 27, 1942. Fairbanks, Alaska, 640 hours. The cold bites before the sun is fully up. It creeps through wool and leather, settles into fingers and teeth, makes metal ache. On the frozen apron outside Ladd Field, breath hangs in the air like smoke as a line of men in unfamiliar uniforms stand silently, boots crunching on frost. Red stars on their caps. Soviet pilots. Captain Ivan Mikhailovich Sokolov pulls his fur-lined collar tighter and stares across the runway. He has flown combat since the first weeks of the invasion. He has watched airfields burn, comrades die, engines fail mid-mission over forests already littered with wreckage. He has flown patched aircraft held together by wire and willpower. What he sees now does not fit any of that experience. Aircraft stretch across the field in neat, almost casual rows. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Fresh paint. Unscarred skins. Engines quiet, waiting. P-39 Airacobras with their shark-like noses. At-20 Havocs squatting low and purposeful. Crates stacked taller than a man, stamped with English words he cannot read. None of them are damaged. None of them smell like burned oil. An American officer captain, William Harris, walks the line with a clipboard, boots polished despite the mud and ice. He gestures toward the aircraft, as if discussing inventory in a warehouse. Sokolov exchanges a look with his wingman. Skalko, his friend, murmurs, "How many?" Sokolov doesn't answer. He is counting silently, and the number keeps growing. This is not a combat deployment. No alarms. No camouflage nets. No urgency. Just machines complete. Finishette delivered to the edge of the world as if distance itself were an inconvenience to be solved. The Americans call this route Alcebalaskazabiria. For the Soviets, it feels unreal. They had expected a handful of aircraft. A symbolic gesture. Instead, they are being handed an air force, one runway at a time. Harris stops beside Sokolov and offers a cigarette. Sokolov hesitates, then takes it. The American lights it for him, cupping the flame against the wind. "Your birds," Harris says, nodding toward the Airacobras. "Fuel's topped. Spares are packed. You fly them east." Sokolov studies the aircraft again. He notices things, immediate light-tells that betray a different way of war. Radios already installed. Instruments standardized. Tires new. Engines rated for hours of continuous operation. He can scarcely imagine. "Where are your pilots?" Sokolov asks in halting English. Harris smiles faintly. "They're not coming." The words hang there, heavier than the cold. Sokolov has been fighting for over a year. He has seen entire regiments wiped out to hold a line for a day. He has buried friends who never even saw the enemy that killed them. And now, standing on American soil, he realizes something that feels almost disorienting. The Americans are fighting the war without being here. The planes come not one by one, but in waves. Each week, more arrive freed up from factories thousands of kilometers away. They land, are inspected, fueled, logged, and handed over. Soviet pilots climb into cockpits still smelling of new leather and paint, taxi out, and disappear into the eastern sky. Across the Bering Strait, airfields in Siberia strain to receive them. Mechanics scramble. Commanders argue over allocation. Entire units are reorganized around aircraft that did not exist in Soviet inventories months earlier. Sokolov's first flight east is terrifying in its own way. Not because of enemy fighters there are none, but because the distance is so vast and the machines so unfamiliar. Yet the Airacobra behaves predictably. The engine does not sputter. The radio works. The gauges tell the truth. When he lands at Nome, then later at Yakutsk, then finally deeper into the Soviet Union, he begins to hear the same whispers everywhere. America Prisilayet Yestio. America is sending more. By the end of the year, it becomes impossible to ignore. Lend-Lease aircraft are appearing on frontline airfields far from Alaska fighters, bombers, transports. They are flown by Soviet pilots, painted with red stars, but their origins are unmistakable. And the numbers keep climbing. In Moscow, staff officers quietly revise planning assumptions. Attrition rates change. Training schedules change. Entire aviation units are re-equipped faster than factories at home could ever manage under bombardment. The war does not suddenly become easy, but it becomes survivable. Sokolov returns to the front in an American-built fighter and shoots down his first German aircraft in it within weeks. He feels no shame, only a strange gratitude. The plane absorbs damage that would have destroyed his old mount. It brings him home. That night, as he sits on a crate outside a frozen revetment, he looks at the growing line of unfamiliar silhouettes parked nearby and understands something fundamental. America is fighting a different kind of war, not with divisions crossing borders, but with machines crossing oceans. And for the men of the Red Air Force, bleeding, exhausted, stretched to the limit, realization is shocking. An entire air war is arriving piece by piece, and not a single American soldier has fired a shot to make it happen. September 29, 1941. Murmansk Harbor, Soviet Union. A gray dawn hangs low over the Barents Sea. The water is flat and metallic, breathing cold into the bones of every man standing on the pier. Red Army soldiers, mostly boys in oversized greatcoats, stomp their boots to keep feeling in their toes as they watch dark shapes emerge from the fog. One by one, they resolve into ships. American ships. Long, high-sided freighters scarred by salt and ice, their hulls creaking as they nose into the harbor under the watch of Soviet naval guards gripping Mosin-Nagant rifles. Lieutenant Ivan Petrov, 23 years old, assigned to port security, squints through the mist. He expects crates of canned food, maybe trucks. That's what the rumors said. Instead, the first cargo nets rise from the holds, and his breath catches. Wings. Not broken scrap. Not partial frames. But entire aircraft, disassembled with Karolivodrab fuselages wrapped in tarpaulin. Wings stenciled with white numbers, propellers crated like precision instruments. The markings are unfamiliar. English letters. Serial numbers that mean nothing to him. Around Ivan the dock goes quiet. No speeches. No flags. Just the steady grind of winches and the slap of cables against steel as Bell P-39 Aerocobras American fighters are lowered onto Soviet soil without a single shot fired. Ivan has been at war for 3 months. He has seen villages burned, columns bombed, comrades buried in shallow graves. The Germans are less than 1,000 kilometers away, and the Red Army is bleeding in retreats that feel endless. Yet here in this frozen harbor, something else is happening, something unreal. An older officer beside him mutters, almost to himself. They sent planes. Not a plane. Not a symbolic gift. Planes. Dozens. And more ships are still coming in. Thousands of kilometers away, in Washington, D.C., this moment has already been planned, argued over, and signed into law. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, seated behind his desk earlier that year, had leaned forward and described it simply: "We will lend, not sell, what is needed to defeat Hitler." Congress called it Lend-Lease. Critics called it dangerous. Isolationists warned it would drag America into another European bloodbath. But the paperwork is already done. The ships are already at sea. Back in Murmansk, Soviet dockworkers move fast. German reconnaissance planes have been spotted in the area before. Everyone knows the Luftwaffe would love nothing more than to bomb this harbor and erase this miracle before it begins. Cargo is rushed inland under camouflage nets. Trains wait with steam hissing, ready to haul American steel south toward the front. Ivan watches as a Soviet aviation officer major, judging by the insignia, runs his gloved hand along the smooth metal of a P-39 fuselage. The man doesn't smile. He doesn't need to. His fingers linger like he's touching something alive. For years, Soviet pilots have trained on machines that are rugged but crude, powerful but unforgiving. Now here are aircraft with enclosed cockpits, radios that actually work, instrumentation laid out with a logic that makes sense at a glance. The Americans, it seems, have built these planes to be flown every day, not just admired on parade grounds. And this is only the beginning. By October 1941, the German army is closing on Moscow. Panic simmers beneath official slogans. Factories are dismantled and hauled east. Aircraft production struggles under evacuation and bombing. Pilots arrive at units to find there aren't enough machines to fly. Then the trains from the north start arriving. At airfields outside Arkhangelsk and later deeper inland, Soviet ground crews pry open American crates. Inside are 40 Warhawks, spare Allison engines, crates of .50 caliber ammunition unlike anything produced in the USSR. Instruction manuals in English are hastily translated by hand, margins filled with Cyrillic notes and grease stains. Captain Sergei Volkov, a fighter pilot recently pulled back from the front, climbs into an Airacobra for the first time. He expects disappointment. Foreign machines often look good on paper and fail in combat. Instead, when the engine turns over, it starts clean. No coughing, no hesitation. The cockpit heater works. The radio crackles to life. Sergei taxis out, lifts off, and feels the plane respond smooth, predictable, almost forgiving. He lands, removes his helmet, and laughs once, sharply, like someone who hasn't laughed in weeks. "They sent us this," he says. "For free." Word spreads not through newspapers, but through mess halls, hangars, and smoke-filled barracks. The Americans are not here. No troops. No advisors barking orders. Just ships arriving again and again, loaded with aircraft, trucks, fuel, aluminum, tools capacity. To men fighting for every kilometer of frozen ground, it feels impossible. Ivan Petrov, reassigned to convoy duty, watches another shipment roll past more crates, more wings, more engines disappearing east. He realizes something unsettling and hopeful at the same time. America is fighting this war without fighting here. And somehow it may change everything. November 1941. Ivanovo Airfield, northeast of Moscow. Snow drifts across the runway in thin, wind-carved lines. The sun is pale, almost decorative, barely warming the metal skins of the aircraft lined up beside the hangars. They don't look Soviet. That much is obvious even at a distance. Their proportions are differential noses, unfamiliar tail shapes, paint that seems to resist the grime. Captain Sergei Volkov pulls his gloves tighter and walks toward his assigned aircraft, a Bell P-39 Airacobra, fresh from the north. The red star on its fuselage is new, hastily applied over where an American insignia once sat. The plane smells different, not just oil and cold metal, but something faintly chemical, factoriclian. Inside the hangar, a group of mechanics crowds around an open engine cowling. None of them speak English fluently. One knows enough to decipher headings. Another worked as a machinist before the war and understands the logic of precision manufacturing. Together, they puzzle through the aircraft like surgeons, examining an unfamiliar body. What surprises them first is not speed or armament, its consistency. American parts fit. Bolts thread smoothly. Panels align without being forced. When something breaks, there's a replacement already labeled, already accounted for. Crates arrive not just with aircraft, but with spare engines, tires, radios, even tools designed specifically for these machines. For a Red Army accustomed to improvisation, this is a revelation. Training begins immediately. There is no time for ceremonies. Luftwaffe bombers are already ranging over the outskirts of Moscow. Every pilot knows that the next mission might be defensive combat over their own cities. Sergei sits in a classroom converted from a storage shed, listening to a young translator read from a smudged American manual. The diagrams are unlike Soviet Onsklian, almost friendly. Fuel flow, electrical systems, emergency procedures, all laid out step by step. One page shows how to exit the aircraft safely after a forced landing. Sergei notices that detail. Someone somewhere in America thought about the pilot surviving. In the air, the P-39 reveals its quirks. The engine is mounted behind the cockpit, an unusual design. The aircraft doesn't like high-altitude fighting, but down low where the Eastern Front lives it accelerates hard and turns with confidence. And the nose-mounted 37 cannon hits like a hammer. After a gunnery exercise, Sergei lands and climbs out, adrenaline still buzzing in his hands. He has flown Soviet fighters for years. This one feels different, less temperamental, less likely to kill him through mechanical betrayal. Around him, other pilots are coming to the same conclusion. By December, the American planes are no longer novelties. They are integrated into regiments, assigned serial numbers, flown into combat. Soviet pilots paint personal markings on them, scratch Cyrillic slogans onto American metal. For Moscow, for Leningrad, the Germans notice. Luftwaffe intelligence reports mention unfamiliar aircraft shapes appearing at the front. German pilots encounter fighters that don't quite match the silhouettes in their recognition guides. Some underestimate them, a mistake that proves fatal at treetop altitude, where the Airacobra thrives. On the ground, American aircraft deliveries are matched by something equally transformative: logistics. Trucks, thousands of them, roll off ships and trains. Studebakers, Dodges, machines that start in the cold, carry heavy loads and keep moving. Soviet infantry units accustomed to horse-drawn supply wagons suddenly find themselves mobile in ways they have never experienced. Fuel arrives in standardized containers. Aviation gasoline. Lubricants refined to a quality that extends engine life. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make headlines, but it keeps planes flying day after day. Ivan Petrov, now assigned to an airfield security detachment, watches American-built aircraft take off in pairs, then trios, then full squadrons. He listens to the engines fade into the winter sky and realizes that for the first time since June, the sound overhead is not always German. There is no American flag flying here, no U.S. officers giving orders. Yet the influence is undeniable. In mess halls, pilots argue about which American plane is better. Some prefer the ruggedness of the 40. Others swear by the Airacobra's firepower. All agree on one thing: there are more of them every week. And far across the ocean, factories continue to run. While Soviet industry relocates and rebuilds under fire, American assembly lines produce aircraft at a pace almost unimaginable. Machines roll out, are tested, crated, shipped north through U-boat-infested waters, or east through Iran, or west across the Pacific. The war on the Eastern Front is being reshaped not by foreign soldiers, but by volume. By the time winter locks the front lines in ice, the Red Air Force is quietly becoming something new. Not just desperate, not just resilient, but supplied. March 1942. The Kalinin Front. The snow is breaking up now, turning fields into gray slush and roads into rivers of mud. Engines labor, tracks grind, and above it all, the sky hangs low and heavy, the kind of ceiling that forces air battles down into knife-fighting range. Lieutenant Alexei Morozov pushes the throttle forward and feels the American engine respond immediately. No coughing, no hesitation. The P-39 Airacobra surges ahead, skimming just above the treetops as he follows a frozen river toward the front. This is where the Eastern Front lies below 3,000 meters. And here, the Americans have unknowingly built the right machine. Morozov spots them first: Ju-87 Stukas, black crosses stark against the clouded sky, diving toward Soviet positions. He banks hard, the Airacobra answering cleanly, and lines up the lead bomber. When he fires, the 37 cannon thunders just onsen the Stuka disintegrates, wings shearing away as if torn by invisible hands. There is no prolonged dogfight, no elegant spirals. This is violence at close range, brutal and final. By the time Morozov lands, ground crews are already refueling another American-built fighter beside him. The turnaround is fast, too fast for German expectations. Along the front, commanders begin to notice a change that is difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. German reconnaissance flights return damaged or not at all. Bombing raids face increasing opposition at low altitude. Soviet fighters appear in greater numbers, more frequently, and in places where the Luftwaffe had grown accustomed to uncontested airspace. What the Germans do not yet fully grasp is that this is not the result of a single superior aircraft. It is density. For every fighter lost, another appears. For every damaged plane, parts are available. Engines are swapped instead of cannibalized. Aircraft that once would have been grounded for weeks are back in the air within days. At forward airfields, American fuel drums stack higher. Replacement tires arrive already matched and balanced. Radios function reliably, allowing Soviet pilots to coordinate in the air, something that had been inconsistent at best before the war. The effect compounds. Summer 1942. Voronezh sector. The Luftwaffe still holds advantages. Better trained pilots. Experience. Superior high-altitude performance. But the character of the fight is changing. Soviet air regiments rotate pilots more effectively now. Fatigue is managed. Losses, while still heavy, are no longer catastrophic. There is always another aircraft, another sortie. Morozov watches a new arrival taxi in a Douglas Atwinty Boston, its twin engines humming steadily. He's never flown a light bomber before, but he knows the reputation already. Fast, durable, hard to catch. Within weeks, A-20s are flying night harassment missions, pounding German supply lines with relentless regularity. They are not glamorous operations. They are exhausting, methodical, and devastating to morale. German soldiers begin referring to them as the constant ones. They never stop coming. Behind the scenes, Soviet logistics officers wrestle with something they've never had in abundance choice. Aircraft types multiply. Spare parts inventories grow. Standardization becomes possible. Training improves because machines behave predictably. Pilots spend less time fighting their own equipment and more time fighting the enemy. American instructors never appear, but American engineering philosophy does. Red Army Air Force manuals are quietly rewritten, incorporating procedures learned from foreign machines. Maintenance schedules shift from reactive to preventative. It is an institutional change, slow but irreversible. And all of it is happening while American soldiers fight and die thousands of kilometers away, in places like Guadalcanal and North Africa. On the Eastern Front, no American rifle is fired. No American blood spills into Soviet soil. Yet American industry is everywhere. By late 1942, as the battle for Stalingrad rages, Soviet pilots fly cover with increasing confidence. German transports struggle to supply the encircled Sixth Army under growing air pressure. Every successful interception feels like another thread tightening around the German position. Morozov listens to radio chatter crackle clearly in his headset, guiding him toward an incoming formation. He adjusts course without hesitation, trusting the instruments, trusting the engine, trusting that if he makes it back there will be another mission tomorrow. Below him, the Volga winds through smoke and ruin. For the first time since the invasion began, the balance in the sky no longer feels predetermined. It feels negotiable. January 1943. Saratov Oblast. Deep in the Soviet rear. The airfield is a frozen grid of packed snow and timber planking, carved out of empty steppe that had never seen an aircraft before the war. Now it hums day and night. Rows of planes stretch across the field, some Soviet-built, others unmistakably foreign. Broad wings, rounded noses, English labels stenciled beneath layers of Cyrillic paint. Mechanics move between them like ants, bundled in padded coats, breath fogging the air as they work by lantern light. Captain Ivan Petrov, logistics officer for the 8th Air Army, stands with a clipboard tucked under his arm, watching another aircraft roll to a stop. A Bell P-39, fresh from a depot hundreds of kilometers away, delivered not by rail alone, but by a chain of decisions that began in Washington years earlier. Petrov does the math automatically. Fuel consumption, spare parts, sortie rate, loss replacement. The numbers still don't feel real. Before the war, an air regiment losing a dozen aircraft might be rendered ineffective for months. Now replacements arrive in batches. Not always on time, not always in perfect condition. But they arrive, and that changes everything. At the front, pilots feel it first not as strategy, but as atmosphere. They are no longer alone. German pilots still score kills, still win engagements. But when they return to base, Soviet aircraft are already airborne again. Another patrol, another interception, another bomber stream diverted, harassed, broken up. The Luftwaffe begins to feel the strain of distance. Fuel shortages, maintenance backlogs, pilot fatigue. Soviet units, by contrast, are grinding forward on momentum. Morozov flies twice in one day now, sometimes three. His aircraft comes back riddled with holes, control surfaces stiff with ice and damage, but the engine holds. It always seems to hold. When he asks a ground crew chief how, the man just shrugs. American bearings, he says. They don't crack. By mid-1943, as preparations for Kursk intensify, the scale becomes impossible to ignore. Entire air armies redeploy with levels of equipment density that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. Fighters escort bombers not because doctrine demands it, but because there are enough fighters to do so. American-built transports 47 Dakatash all men, ammunition, and fuel to forward strips, landing in snowstorms and dust clouds with equal indifference. Wounded are evacuated faster. Units regroup quicker. None of it makes headlines. None of it feels heroic in isolation. But together, it accelerates everything. German intelligence officers file reports noting increased Soviet air activity, improved coordination, faster recovery from losses. The conclusions are cautious, hedged with disbelief. They still tell themselves that Soviet aircraft are inferior, that pilots lack finesse, that quantity cannot replace quality. What they fail to see is that quality no longer stands alone. It is being amplified. In July 1943, during the opening days of Kursk, Morozov climbs into a sky thick with aircraft. Soviet fighters, Soviet bombers, anti-aircraft fire blooming below like black flowers. This time, when German fighters dive, they meet resistance immediately. Radios crackle, formations tighten, attacks are coordinated rather than improvised. The air battle is chaos, but it is organized chaos. Morozov fires, brakes, climbs. He loses sight of one enemy, only to be vectored onto another by a controller miles away. The system holds. The net tightens. When he lands hours later, exhausted and half-deaf, another pilot is already climbing into his aircraft. There is no ceremony, only continuity. Far from the front in American factories, shifts change. Assembly lines never sleep. Riveters work through the night, unaware of Morozov, of Stalingrad, of Kursk. They measure success in units completed, not enemies destroyed. Crates are sealed, paperwork stamped, ships loaded. Somewhere between Detroit and Murmansk, the war passes through 1,000 invisible hands. By 1944, Soviet air superiority is no longer theoretical. It is situational, contested but real. German pilots notice fewer safe corridors. Bombing missions require escorts that no longer guarantee survival. The Red Army advances beneath a sky that feels less hostile, less inevitable. Morozov, now a veteran with dozens of missions, watches new pilots arrive, boys who have never known a time when aircraft were scarce. They complain about engine quirks, about visibility, about radio clarity. He almost laughs. They have no idea. None of this will appear in victory parades. No American pilot will stand on Red Square. No shared medals will change hands at the front. But as Soviet forces push westward, powered by fuel refined overseas, carried by trucks stamped with foreign names, covered by aircraft built in distant cities, one truth becomes undeniable. America has been fighting this war here all along. Just not with soldiers. May 1944. Belarusian front. Forward airstrip outside Orsha. Spring has turned the ground into a sucking brown mire. Mud cakes boots, tires, landing gear. The air smells of oil, wet earth, and exhaust. And yet the airfield is alive. Aircraft line up nose to tail fighters, attack planes, transport some Soviet designs, others still carrying the bones of American manufacture beneath layers of green paint and red stars. Ground crews work without pause, boots sinking with every step, hands blackened by grease and cordite. Senior Lieutenant Ivan Morozov stands beside his aircraft, helmet under his arm, watching a flight of fighters lift off in sequence. One after another. No long gaps. No waiting for engines to cool or fuel to arrive. Just movement. Just flow. A few years ago, an airfield like this would have been a dream or a target. Now it is routine. The German front is cracking. Operation Bagration is weeks away, but its shadow already looms. Soviet planners are coordinating artillery, armor, infantry, and above all, air power with a confidence that borders on audacity. This time, the sky will not be contested piecemeal. It will be saturated. American-built radios allow tighter coordination. Lend-Lease fuel stocks allow sustained operations without pauses dictated by shortages. Replacement aircraft wait in depots, ready to roll forward as airstrips leapfrog westward. When losses occur, they still are absorbed. The machine does not slow. Morozov flies cover for a bomber formation striking rail junctions. Below him, columns of smoke rise where German logistics once flowed freely. Trains sit abandoned on sidings, rails twisted, yards cratered. He hears German fighters on the radio before he sees them. They come in low, fast, but they are fewer now. Their attacks feel desperate rather than confident. Hit and run instead of domination. Morozov and his wingman pounce, not as lone hunters, but as part of a layered screen. Another Soviet pair joins from above. Anti-aircraft fire brackets the sky. The Germans break off. No kills claimed. No cheers. Just denial. And denial is enough. On the ground, Soviet infantry advance beneath that denial. German aircraft appear less frequently. When they do, they are chased away quickly. Soldiers notice. They talk about it in foxholes and tents. About how the sky used to belong to the enemy. About how now, sometimes, it feels neutral or even friendly. For men who have spent years looking upward in fear, that shift is profound. Deep in the rear, logistics officers track aircraft like numbers on a board. Attrition curves. Replacement cycles. Transit times. What shocks them is not that aircraft are lost. It is how fast they are replaced. Crates keep arriving. Engines. Instruments. Radios. Entire airframes broken down and rebuilt. Not miracles. Just systems. By the time Soviet forces cross into Poland, the scale is undeniable. Air armies operate continuously. Aircraft sortie counts rival or exceed those of the Luftwaffe in the same sectors. German pilots complain of being overwhelmed not by superior machines, but by persistent presence. Destroy one aircraft, and another takes its place. Destroy a squadron, and a regiment appears. The war of attrition has shifted domains. Morozov survives long enough to become an instructor. He watches new pilots climb into cockpits that feel normal to them: reliable radios, dependable engines, predictable logistics. They think this is how war works. He knows better. He remembers empty airfields, cannibalized wrecks, waiting weeks for parts that never came. He remembers when the sky felt vast and empty and hostile. When Berlin finally falls, there are no American aircraft overhead. No stars and stripes on the Reichstag. But in Soviet hangars and scrap yards, scattered across half a continent, lie the remains of thousands of American-built Maschinensuits, worn, patched, and spent. They will not be remembered individually, but together they carried a war forward. Not with bullets, not with bayonets, but with wings. And